So, taking off from where we stopped earlier, we're going to talk about the alphabet soup agencies in the New Deal. Now, to be sure, we talked about the three R's of the New Deal: relief, recovery, and reform. A lot of these early agencies that we're going to talk about are focused on the relief portion, which is to provide immediate relief to the situation that the Great Depression has put us in. If you want to think about the Great Depression as almost like an injury, the first thing that you want in the wake of an injury is you want some kind of relief, some kind of pain relief. And in this sense, these initial programs are meant to be not quick fixes, but provide some sort of quick solutions to the problems of the Depression. So the CCC, for example, which is another reason why they're called alphabets. The reason they're called alphabet soup is because they're known by their acronyms. So the Civilian Conservation Corps is going to pay money to young, typically unmarried men to basically go around and keep up all the national parks that we have in the country. Why would they target young, unmarried men? Well, because they're young and because they're unmarried, they're not attached to a particular geographic location necessarily, and so they can be sent all around the country. This is probably one of the most successful New Deal programs, at least during this phase, during the relief phase, because of the balance between both the jobs that it provided and also the good that it did. So places like Turkey Run, your state parks, those are all in some way influenced by the CCC, either in terms of the building of their infrastructure or what have you. Another one is this thing called the Agricultural Adjustment Act or Administration, or the AAA. And what it does is it pays farmers to limit their production. And what this is a price control. And we're going to get into this a little bit later because there is some controversies surrounding the legitimacy of this. But basically, why would you pay farmers to limit their production? Well, by limiting their production, what you do is you create lower market prices. You create higher market prices because you create an artificial shortage. And what this is designed to do is to try to help throw the market back into balance. And this is one of those things, I'll give you guys an opportunity in class to ask questions about the material that we've gone over. I would definitely suggest asking about the AAA because of sort of the economic implications of it, because it's very, very difficult to explain in this format. Another program is the NRA, and it's not the National Rifle Association. It is the National Recovery Act. What it does is it creates this thing called the Public Works Administration. And this is the first time, I shouldn't say the first time, but this is an opportunity for private companies and the government to work together to build mainly infrastructure, but also other buildings and roads and things of that nature. Basically, competing businesses are now going to work together to set fair prices and fair operating hours. All of this is under the heading of this thing called the National Industrial Recovery Act. And essentially what the Public Works Administration is it's a form of a legalized cartel. You have businesses that are working together to set prices that are fair to all parties. And the person who determines, or I shouldn't say the person, but the group that determines what is fair and what is not fair is the government. They also are going to develop a set of policies that are friendly towards the growth of unions. Why are these policies going to favor unions? Well, because the thinking goes is that if we favor unions, if we give more power to unions, we're giving more power to people, the people who need the help the most. And so unions are also going to see a bit of a bump as a part of the Great Depression. There are some specific geographic agencies that are created, the most famous of which is the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA. And what it does is it basically is another infrastructure program to help develop the rather poor area that's in the neighborhood of the Tennessee River. And what it ends up doing is providing power to 7 states, which you see there on the map, and also helps to provide better avenues for education and better health care as well. And what it also does while doing that is it's going to employ thousands. So you have thousands of people who now have jobs building and then operating these dams. And then also it gives government the control over some really badly run private utilities. Utilities companies are this is where they're going to really find their sort of awkward position that they're in now, where they are private, but they are controlled very strictly by the government, which is something that we still see in practice today. So to this point, the first New Deal focuses on sort of that immediate relief, that R of the 3 R's. And a lot of Americans are very, very happy with these efforts because they have that relief. Okay. Again, going back to the injury analysis, analogy. When you have some kind of an injury and you have some type of pain relief, ibuprofen, Tylenol, whatever it might be, you feel pretty good about it. You feel pretty happy about it. But what it does not do is it does not necessarily take away the symptom of whatever it is that ails you. And in this case, Americans are happy. They feel better. But the first New Deal does not end the Great Depression, not by a long stretch. And the rest of FDR's first term and then into his second term is going to be focused on this thing called the Second New Deal. And the Second New Deal is going to focus more on the recovery and the reform. All right. So that's sort of the line of demarcation. That first 100 days into the first half of Roosevelt's first term is the first New Deal. Everything after that and into his second term is known as the Second New Deal. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't critics, because there were. Specifically, a guy named Father Charles Kavanaugh, who's a radio evangelist. He is going to encourage more prolonged relief programs that at the time would have been thought far too radical, and then was ignored because of some anti-Semitic comments that he made on his programs. And then there was a guy by the name of Dr. Francis Townsend, who pitched to millions the idea of a federal pension plan for the elderly, but it was seen as too unrealistic, which is somewhat ironic given what we're going to see Roosevelt create and what that creation then transforms into, and we'll get to that here in a minute. By far and away the most famous critic of FDR and his New Deal was this guy named Huey Long. He was this massively popular, at least in his region of Louisiana, politician who promoted, some different reforms and programs. It really made him sound more like a dictator than anything else, or a Robin Hood. He had this plan called the Share Our Wealth Plan, which was basically where we're going to heavily, heavily tax the wealthy, and those taxes are going to go directly to the poor and downtrodden. He promised $5,000 to every U.S. family to help pay for a home, to help pay for a farm, to help pay for a small business, whatever they felt. Their definition of a homestead was a free college education to anyone who wanted it. He actually was so popular that he considered and probably could have started his own political party and then run for president, but he was assassinated in 1935 because he had been seen as having too much control over the Louisiana state governor after he got out of office as governor. There are some other programs that are criticized, specifically the idea of paying artists. There's this project called the Federal Art Project, where artists were paid to go around and paint murals, specifically in courthouses and other public buildings. So the picture there in the middle, the top middle is actually from the Fountain County Courthouse in Covington. Musicians were also paid to write songs to try to lift the spirits of those who were here in the country. And then you also see American Gothic there to the right, which is one of the most famous paintings of this period. Now, the U.S. is ready for a more active plan after those immediate relief efforts are so successful. We apparently skipped back to the start. So here we'll go back to, there we go. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. The New Deal, this is also another one of those paintings. This is in the Stewart Center at Purdue University. Again, just some more of these murals that are found. You can find these in a lot of your older public buildings. Really, really fascinating. Now, one of the groups that is hit the hardest during the Great Depression is farmers. For a number of reasons. We've already touched on the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The other reason, and we'll get into this, is something called the Dust Bowl, which you see pictures down there at the very bottom. But the economic struggles that they faced is that demand for farm products had decreased, and because that had happened, prices had dropped, which is why the government tried to artificially raise prices through creating an artificial shortage. And farmers begin to lose all of their land, begin to lose their entire family farms because they simply can't pay their mortgages, which is what leads to not just the first AAA, but multiple agricultural adjustment acts. And then you see there your Dust Bowl, a period of about 2 years, droughts throughout the entire American Midwest. Literally, feet, we're going to measure the amount of topsoil that is lost as a part of the Dust Bowl in feet, where you've had so much overplanting in these areas where the ground has been worked and then has been left to dry and then worked again and left to dry. All of that overuse has loosened the topsoil, and so when these massive windstorms come through, these storms are literally going to move tons of topsoil, both away from the plains, but to different areas of the Great Plains as well. And so farmers really are going to have a hard time. You're going to see a mass exodus, actually, from the Great Plains, mainly out west as a part of the Dust Bowl. And you can see there are some of the pictures, wagons completely destroyed, houses literally buried up to roofs, really, really awful stuff. If you've ever seen The Wizard of Oz, you'll sort of have an understanding of what one of those dust storms would have been like. Now, Roosevelt's second New Deal. Again, you're looking at probably the back half of his first term and into his second term. And by the way, I think we get into this here in a minute, but he is elected to a second term relatively easily. These programs are going to focus more on the long-term economic stability of the country. So you have the Works Progress Administration helping people find jobs, building airports, teaching, researching. And we already talked about the employment of musicians. We also have hit on already a little bit the growth of unions. So there's going to be two groups that are really going to benefit because of these government policies, and they're actually going to join forces, and that is the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And those two together, led by a guy by the name of John L. Lewis, they are really going to help strengthen the position of the American worker. You also have the establishment of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, to try to keep tabs on the stock market to try to prevent another great crash from happening again. I think that is where we will end part two. I think this is a great spot to end it because we're going to get into Social Security now into part three. And Social Security is going to be a very important thing to pay attention to because this is still something that is on the books today. So we'll come back with part three and start with Social Security in a bit.